So hey there guys, so today's video is going to be a get ready with me talking about the entire Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. So we're going to start out with talking about the first 4 books here. I really can't hold all of them, so there's too many books and they're hardcover, so I couldn't just be like, hey, we're going to talk about all of them because literally it's just too many. I think I briefly talked about these first 4 books in my last reading video, talking about all the books I want to read in 2024, and I shared my reading list and all my Goodreads and all of that. But January was just devoted to reading the entire Throne of Glass series. So I finished it yesterday, and I finished the whole series in exactly 5 weeks. So the fact that I literally finished this series in 5 weeks is kind of mind-blowing to me, because I wasn't sure if I was going to be finished with Kingdom of Ash by the time February started. And I finished it yesterday. And we will talk about why I was able to finish Kingdom of Ash a little bit faster. But each book took me about 3 to 4 days to finish, because the first 4 books are a little bit shorter and then they just end up getting longer and longer. And I'm going to share all my thoughts with you guys, give you guys a review and also a rating of all the books, and tell you which ones are my favorite and which ones are my least favorite ones. But we're just going to start with the Assassin's Blade. I did talk about this one already in my all the books I read in 2023, because this is the only one that I finished in 2023, because like I said before, I did receive this series for Christmas for my mom, and I wanted to start on Assassin's Blade as soon as I could, and then I wanted to be fully invested in this world in January. So I finished Assassin's Blade like from the 27th to the 30th. So I started the series on the 27th and I finished it yesterday, January 30th. This took me from December 27th to I think December 30th to finish, or maybe it was like the 29th, because I remember I finished this in like 3 days. So I think I told you guys before, the reason why I started with the Assassin's Blade is because there is a multitude of differing opinions about where to start the Assassin's Blade, because pretty much all the other books that you read are all like, you know, the order you're supposed to read them in. But since the Assassin's Blade, can I speak? I'm like, since without the N. Since the Assassin's Blade is a prequel, there is much debate on where you should start reading the book in the series. I just started with it as being the first book, and I consider this the first book to me. I know most people consider the Throne of Glass book to be the first book, but for me, this is still book number 1 because I read it first. So basically, I'm not getting any primer on my wand. So basically, the Assassin's Blade is a culmination of stories about Selena, and she is the main character of the entire Throne of Glass series, and basically, she is an assassin. And what happens in this book is her, you know, tales of what the king of the assassins named Arabin makes her do. And like, these are like her trials of being an assassin, and where he sends her to do his bidding pretty much. And he's like his top female assassin, along with a man named Sam. And Sam is basically the love interest in these short stories. And unfortunately, the only character that gets killed in this book that's like really important to like the rest of the series is Sam. And I don't know if that's a spoiler, but I know that a lot of people, I mean, it is a spoiler, but a lot of people have read this series at this point. If you don't want any spoilers, then I suggest you read them, but you pretty much find out he gets killed like very early in the book, like probably like 200 pages in, so it's not really that spoilery. And basically for the rest of this book, she's sent on missions for Arabin. And the main one that's really important is the tale of the assassin in the Red Desert. So she's sent to the Red Desert because he tells her to go there so she can become, I'm just going to put this book down so I can start getting ready, so she can become a better assassin. And basically, in the Red Desert, the assassins that are there are called the Silent Assassins, and her goal is to try and get trained by the, I forget what his name is, the silent assassin, like the head of the silent assassins, but he doesn't want to train her because you have to win like his approval or his, reason why to train you. So that's basically what she does for most of that tale. But she meets a woman named Ansel, and Ansel becomes one of her like best friends. And then at the end of this tale, she ends up betraying, what's her name? Selena. So that's basically what this book is about. And also in the last tale, Arabin ends up betraying Zelena because Arabin has never had, Selena's best interest at heart, because he actually takes her in after her parents are brutally murdered, because Zelena actually wakes up like really young, like around like 10 or 11 years old, and finds her parents both murdered in between her. And I believe that someone makes her run away from it, or maybe that's another. I might be getting confused with another character. I think I am, possibly. I think I might be confusing it with another character. There's just so much that happens in this that it's like kind of hard to keep track of everything. So forgive me if I get my information a little bit screwed up. But basically that's what the Assassin's Blade is about. And I've said this before, but I'm so glad that I decided to read The Assassin's Blade first, because it really does give you so much background on not just Selena, but other characters that she brings back throughout the series. And some of them, they don't even come back until the 7th and 8th book of the series, which I think is like incredible. And I've never really read a series like that where even characters that you think are insignificant come back later in the series. So I really enjoyed The Assassin's Blade. I know some people think that this book is a little bit boring, but it really picks up, I would say, about halfway through. And then once I, got to the last 2 stories, I was hooked. So basically the end of this book leaves off Selena as being sent to the prison called Endeavor by Arabin. Pretty much Arabin is the one that betrays her, because she couldn't figure out who actually betrayed her, but we pretty much know it was Arabin. And then another character named Parrington, and he's actually the Duke of Paranith, I believe, and he's actually like evil. And they based him and Arabin consort with each other, basically, because Arabin is pretty much evil. Even though Arabin is not taken over by the evil that is in this series, he still only really cares about himself and does everything for himself. And he takes her in and trains her as an assassin. And he does some pretty brutal stuff to her and Sam throughout this book. Like, if they betray him, he will beat them up, or he'll make them, like, break their own bones. So it's, like, a lot. But it was a really, really good start to the series. And then we get right into Throne of Glass. And Throne of Glass literally takes place right after Assassin's Blade. And I feel like the only reason why you should read this book first, in my opinion, is that when you would start first, if you were reading this series when it first came out, like if this was the first book that actually came out, then I would understand if you wanted to read it first, like if you were following this series throughout the years. But I would say, since the prequel is out now, it came out like two years later. And some people choose to read it in the order that it was released. Like in the order that the books were released. But basically, in Throne of Glass, it picks up right where Assassin's Blade gets left off. But Celaena is freed from Endeavor and gets sent to Adarlan, and Adarlan, whatever it's called, and that is the kingdom that the Throne of Glass is in, because the castle is actually made of glass, and the throne is actually a glass throne, and its king is actually a tyrant. And she is sent to the kingdom to do the king's bidding. And basically, she is enslaved to the king to kill and assassinate the men that the king asks her to kill. So that's basically what this book is about. And we meet the prince of Adarlan, whose name is Dorian, and then we also meet the captain of the king's army, which is Kale. His name is Kale. I finally figured out, or watched enough reviews now to know how to pronounce his name. And Dorian, spoiler alert, is my favorite character of the entire series. I really love Dorian's character. I know a lot of people love Manon, which she comes up a bit later. But Dorian is my favorite character. I just really enjoyed his character arc, his story throughout the entire series. I just really loved it. And basically, this book is about her going through this kind of bullshit tournament that the king has her and other assassins do for him. And basically they have to go through this whole tournament potentially being killed. But also throughout this tournament, the assassins are actually being killed by something that they don't even know. Like, they keep on getting picked off, not just from the tournament, but outside of the tournament. There are these brutal murders taking place that are killing the other assassins that are in this tournament. And Celaena, grows more and more fearful, trying to figure out who is killing these assassins. And, I'm talking about brutal, trigger warning, but, their entrails being pulled out, their stomachs being ripped open, basically very, inhuman type of murders. So that she basically figures out that, did I say figures out? Figures out that it's not a human that are murdering the assassin. So that's basically what this book is about. And also, we get introduced to Nehemiah's character. And Nehemiah is... Oh, also, before I talk about Nehemiah, you have to know that Adarlan is banned of magic. They don't have any magic because the king actually has a spell cast that prevents anyone from wielding magic in Adarlan. That doesn't specifically mean that everywhere else in the world does not have magic, but Adarlan does not. So, Nehemiah comes from another land. I forget exactly where she's from. Honestly, I kind of feel like I should use a different shade today in here because I'm using the Ensley Rain palette again. I don't know why I can't speak today. I'm like stuttering so bad, but I think I'm just gonna stick with the shade that I wanted, which is Aurora. I think that looks so pretty anyway. So that's basically what this book is about, and Nehemiah befriends Zelena and tells her, like, you're pretty much meant for more than what your role is in this kingdom. So I really loved Throne of Glass, and Dorian ends up falling in love with Zelena. They end up becoming really close, and he, like, does not really want to fall in love with her, or they try not to fall in love because they know that they really could not be together since Dorian will become king one day. And Zelena is an assassin. But also she gets really close to Kale, because Kale is the one that trains Zelena throughout the tournament. You know, so she can kill because basically the king wants her to win this tournament, and if she doesn't, then she has to go back to Endeavor, which obviously she doesn't want to do, since it's like the worst prison ever, and basically she will be a slave there, like, for the rest of her life. So obviously the palace life, y'all, she wants to live in the palace. I mean, duh. So again, I really did enjoy, I was about to say enjoin. What is my English today? That I really did enjoy Throne of Glass, and I really loved this one as well. So at the end of this book, I actually don't really remember what happened at the end of this book. I'm like blanking, but basically she gets sent on another mission and is still working for the king. So then we get into Crown of Midnight, which this was really an intense ride, this book, and this ended up becoming my favorite book so far after I finished this one. So I finished Throne of Glass, I think, in like 4 days, and then I finished Crown of Midnight in like the same amount of time. And in Crown of Midnight, we really start seeing a lot of character development, a lot of development of the story, a lot more of the evil force that Zelena and basically everyone that we have met so far ends up facing. And I will just talk about like the highlights of this book because there is a lot that happens in this book. And it was such an intense ride from beginning to end, and I loved every second of it. It was just such a good book. And basically, we start finding out more so about the forces that are evil. And Zelena, you know, constantly investigates what these forces are. And then we also find out that Dorian ends up being able to wield magic. And his magic is more so like ice, and he is actually a very unique kind of magic because he can wield magic without like he's actually not affected by his father's spell because he's actually like a free welder, which means that he can wield magic whenever he wants. Like, there's multiple different forms of magic. And basically, in this book, it's about, you know, him keeping his secret from his father. And that's why I get more and more involved in Dorian's character, because I just think he's a fascinating character. And also, at the end of Throne of Glass, Selena and Dorian pretty much just agree mutually that they can't be together. So she ends up getting closer to Cale and ends up falling in love with Cale. And then a huge betrayal happens in this book, and basically, Nehemiah is summoned to the king, and Cale knows that she has to be summoned to the king and talk to the king. But it ends up being something that happens completely different, and Nehemiah ends up being murdered. And Cale actually didn't tell Selena or warn her that the king wanted to summon Nehemiah, because whenever like the king summoned, you know, someone that wasn't from the kingdom, you pretty much knew that it wasn't gonna be a good outcome. And this ends up shattering Zelena, and she ends up wanting to kill Cale, even though they were in love. And now you pretty much know as a reader that Cale and Selena can never be together again, because she felt this huge betrayal from him. And I was bawling my eyes out when this part happened. It was heartbreaking to read. And then throughout the rest of the book, you just find out who the Volg are and how evil they are. It was just so good. There's so much that happens in this book. Okay, let me just wipe my under eyes and then we'll talk about the rest. Okay, so yeah, I really, really enjoyed Crown of Midnight. And basically at the end of Crown of Midnight, well, after Selena, you know, is betrayed by Cale, and honestly, like, Nehemiah's death kind of shatters her, and she now doesn't really care, like, what the king wants and what he wants her to do, that she becomes reckless, and she actually ends up killing one of the characters from the second book. Maybe that happened in the second book. I really cannot remember. If I get details mixed up, I'm sorry. For some reason, it was very hard for me to keep track of everything that happened in this series, because, again, so much happens in it that it's like a lot of information to retain. But basically, she feels betrayed, and she's being very reckless, and she doesn't really care what happens at this point. Because, like, you know, there are a few points in these books where Zelena just, like, doesn't want to live anymore. She's just so down and so depressed, and thinks that after, you know, she pretty much thinks that everybody that she gets close to is going to end up being killed in some kind of way. So, like, that's why she's always been very weary of people. But yeah, I really, really loved Crown of Midnight, and that was definitely my favorite so far of the series when I read them. But I think I read all 3 of those books in, like, probably like a week and a half, because they were just so good, and the momentum just kept up throughout these books, and I was just so hooked on the series by this point. So let me just finish blending this out, and then we can talk about the next book, because I can't lift it up without, you know, blending that out first. So the 4th book in the series is called Heir of Fire, and quite a lot happens in this as well. So at the end of Crown of Midnight, basically, Cale is very fearful of Zelena's actions, and he ends up sending Selena to this land. I forget what it's called. Oh my god, I forget what it's called. I will definitely look at what it's called in a minute, but basically she gets sent away because since, you know, her and Cale can't ever really be together again because she doesn't really trust him anymore, he sends her away to the Fae lands. And he basically finds out that she can wield magic. And also in Crown of Midnight, Selena finds out that Dorian can wield magic, and they both basically keep each other's secrets because obviously in Aderlon, I'm just gonna grab the other 4 books so I don't have to get up again. But these are like the beefy big mamas. Oh my god. These are like really long books. And basically she gets sent away because Chol is kind of fearful of her at this point. And she gets sent away to be trained by a Fae prince named Rowan. And the Fae land is ruled by the queen of the Fae, which is named Maeve. And Maeve is actually Selena's aunt. So she is actually family. And she gets sent there to wield her magic, to learn how to use her magic. And that's basically what Heir of Fire is about. And also we get introduced to witches in Heir of Fire. And we get introduced to Manon's character, which her name is Manon Blackbeak. And there's several different clans of witches. There are the Yellow Legs, there are the Blackbeaks, there are the, I forget what the other ones are. But basically the Yellow Legs and the Blackbeaks are like the 2 that you really need to know about. And Manon is the head of the Blackbeaks. And the only reason why, like, I would say, like, I still really loved this book. But this one kind of slowed down a bit for me because just for some reason, I was getting really bored with some of the parts with Manon. Because, like, the parts hadn't really picked up yet. But I was, like, excited that a witch was being introduced in this series. Oh my god, I didn't take the cap back off. But I end up really loving Manon's character and everything that happens with her. So, and we're also introduced to... Are we introduced to him in the 4th book? Maybe it's the 5th book. Oh, her cousin, Aedion, is actually imprisoned in Aderlon. And I forget why he's imprisoned. Again, don't count on me for details, guys, because I can't remember half of what goes on. But he is imprisoned by the King of Aderlon. And Selena ends up finding this out, so she wants to go free him. But she has to stay in Faeland. I'm just going to call it Faeland because I can't remember the name of the kingdom. Or queendom, because it's ruled by a queen, obviously. But, so she's trained throughout this whole book, but also, like, wielding magic and learning how to control it takes a really long time. And Maeve makes a deal with Selena because Maeve is a very powerful queen, and she ends up becoming, like, very suspicious, and Selena does not trust her at all, and Rowan is basically her servant. And you learn about something called the Blood Oath in this book, which means that they are blood sworn to their queen. And it's like kind of like a magical bond where if you leave your queen, you could pretty much almost die, or you can be shamed for the rest of your life if you break your blood off. Like, you cannot leave the land, you cannot leave your queen, you have to serve her for your whole life. And also the Fae are immortal. So basically at the end of this book, she goes back to, is that what happens? Oh my god, I'm like... I was trying to watch reviews and reading vlogs of it last night, like, of the whole series, to keep, like, because basically through Crown of Midnight and to Empire Storms, even though those were some of my favorite books, I get lost with the sequence of events that happen. And I'm like, did this happen in this book, or did this happen in the next book? Because I actually cannot remember. But also in Heir of Fire, we learn a lot about the Volg again, and basically find out that the king is building a Volg empire. And at first we didn't know that the king was actually being possessed by a Volg king as well, and that's why the king is a tyrant, because the king hasn't been the king. He hasn't been human in a really long time, and Dorian did not even know that until like book 6 or 7, when he actually ends up killing the king. So Zelena returns, and she comes back to help Dorian murder the king. But also Dorian falls in love with a lady named Sorsa, and I believe that's in Heir of Fire as well, because I believe this all happens at the end of Heir of Fire, because the king has spies everywhere, and he ends up finding out that Dorian can wield magic. Wait, do they kill him at the end of this book? Oh my god, I'm like getting so lost. Maybe he... No, because, Aelin is still in, Phaeland in this book. But she comes back to help Dorian. But Dorian ends up getting possessed by a demon in, the end of this book, because this is what happens. I'm sorry that I'm getting confused. I'm like really annoyed at myself actually, but I kind of understand like the timelines in Queen of Shadows and Empire of Storms a little bit better. So at the end of Heir of Fire, so wait, hold on. So Dorian ends up falling in love with a healer named Sorsa. And since the king finds out, and I think Sorsa ends up being like a type of spy for the king, but also she didn't end up thinking that she was going to fall in love with Dorian, but she does. And, you know, you were finally rooting for Dorian to have, you know, a love interest, because, you know, since he couldn't be with Zelena, even though... Honestly, I was kind of rooting for Dorian or Chol throughout the first 3 books. Well, yeah, Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight. But then Rowan comes into the picture and kind of shits on all of that. And then we're basically, when she meets Rowan, Rowan is Fae. But you also end up finding out that Zelena is actually half Fae herself. So then once you find that out, you're like, you know, that she's going to end up being with Rowan. But Rowan actually ends up hating her when he first meets her, and then they end up falling in love. But he actually doesn't even care about her when she comes to Phaeland, because why would he? Because he is immortal. He actually lost his mate. Because Faes have, I can talk about this forever, I guess, like we're on this tangent now, but Faes have, you know, companions named mates, and basically, you are like pretty much blood sworn to your mate. That's what Faes have. They don't have like husbands and wives, they have mates, even though they obviously can get married. So, they end up falling in love. And then she ends up coming back to, Selena ends up coming back to Adarlan in the beginning of Queen of Shadows. So at the end of Heir of Fire, since the king finds out that Dorian is with Sorsa, he ends up murdering Sorsa, beheading her. It was so brutal and so sad. I think I cried a little bit. I can't remember. But it was just really, really sad. So, you know, Zelena ends up finding out what happens. And then, like I said, she also finds out that Dorian was possessed by one of the Volg. So now we're going to jump into Queen of Shadows. And Queen of Shadows was definitely my second favorite out of the entire series. A lot of people love this one for good reason. This is such a ride from beginning to end. Like, the momentum does not stop. And I also want to say that in this book, I ended up really loving Manon's parts a lot more than I did in the fourth book. So throughout this book, she switches between Selena's perspective and Dorian's perspective mostly, and Manon's. And Dorian is, you know, going through his possession of being possessed by a demon. So because in Heir of Fire, it doesn't really concentrate as much on Dorian. It really only concentrates on his love story with Sorsa in Heir of Fire. But then he ends up, like, hating his father because he beheaded Sorsa. It's just so sad. And Chol, like, still serves Dorian, and, like, he's literally heartbroken for him when this happens. But basically, Kale is Dorian's constant throughout the entire series because, but Kale is kind of an important character, honestly. Like, and again, I don't really hate him as much as other people do because he, you know, constantly struggles. I just dropped all my brushes. Fucking moron. Just keep on dropping them. Stupid idiot. Anyway. Jesus. I got, like, eyeshadow all over my fucking computer because you're an idiot. So, anyway. In Queen of Shadows, we basically find out a bunch about the Volg again. And since Zelena is now back in Adarlan, she can't stay at the kingdom anymore because she doesn't work for the king anymore since she was sent away. And also she finds out, you know, that the king is, you know, crazy evil, that she ends up staying in the apartment that Sam and her stayed in Assassin's Blade. So this is where a lot of, like, the references to Sam come back into play in Queen of Shadows. And it's kind of crazy how she brings it back 5 books later. And also, we are introduced to her, Manon has, like, this woman that works for her, and her name is Elide. And she is actually, like, a half-breed witch. And, she ends up becoming pretty important in a few of the other books. But we're also back with Arobynn in Queen of Shadows. Like, we get Arobynn, back, and basically she has to work with Arobynn, to, like, get, like, details and all of that about, like, what the king is doing to, you know, humans, and why is, you know, Adarlan's pretty much, like, fucked right now. So, she ends up having to kind of befriend Arobynn because obviously her main goal is to kill him because he betrayed her. Of course she's going to kill him. So, throughout this book, it pretty much, you know, tells us a lot about the Volg. And also, we are introduced to the character named Lysandra. And Lysandra actually is, like, oh my god, Selena's, rival when they're growing up. So it's not just her and Sam, but Lysandra was also part of the Assassin's clan as well. And Lysandra is pretty much still bound to Arobynn. But get this. So Arobynn didn't just kill Sam off, because everybody knew that he killed Sam and it was devastating. He also killed Lysandra's lover. So Lysandra has even more of a reason to want to kill Arobynn. And basically, she's the one that actually ends up getting to kill him in this book, which is kind of crazy. And also, I didn't really see that coming, but they end up like beheading him. It's like a whole thing, but you know, he's finally dead. And I love how one person described it as Ding Dong, the witch is dead. I thought that was so funny. On one of the TikTok reviews I was watching. And basically, Zelena has to save Dorian from the possession of the Volg that's possessing him. So, her and Kale end up killing the king at the end, but also Kale has a price to pay for freeing, for trying to kill the king, and he ends up getting injured, and his back ends up getting paralyzed, and he is now, you know, wheelchair bound, like he can't really walk. But that's his price. But also, Selena has to save Dorian, and Dorian ends up stabbing Selena because he's still possessed by a demon, but it takes like everything out of her to free Dorian of this demon. But throughout the whole book, Dorian is struggling to remember like who Selena even is, because this Volg king is possessing him. He has like such foggy memories of her, like he's not really sure who she is. But also Dorian is actually mindlessly murdering people that the king asks him to murder. So Lysandra comes into play a little bit, especially in Empire of Storms. Like, she's not really a huge main character right now. And she also frees Aedion in Queen of Shadows. I don't remember exactly what happens with Aedion throughout this book. He basically like lives in the apartment with what's her name? Selena. Why do I keep on forgetting her name? But we end up finding out that her real name is actually Aelin, but she doesn't really refer to Selena as Aelin really 100% until like Empire of Storms, and that's where everything really, really takes off. So Queen of Shadows was amazing. But Aedion is with Zelena actually, since her name is Aelin now, because after Heir of Fire, Aedion comes together with Zelena because she saves him, and then Rowan ends up finding Selena and Queen of Shadows, and basically the three of them team up. And this is actually technically her court, because she is actually the Queen of Terrasen, and Terrasan, whatever, and her name is actually Aelin, and she possesses fire. She is the Heir of Fire. And the reason why this is called Queen of Shadows is because she comes back to fight the Volg and the Shadows that are evil. But also we find out who like the Queen of Shadows really is. And this book was absolutely amazing. And at the end, she does end up freeing Dorian. But you know, he didn't really know what he did by stabbing her, and like he feels absolutely awful about doing that. So this book was amazing. I loved it so much. Now let's go into Empire of Storms. And we're going to talk about Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn at the same time, because this is when I hit the tandem read of both of these books. And originally, I wasn't sure if I was going to do the tandem read of both, because I'm like, I don't know if I really want to keep track of two books at the same time. But actually, it was kind of really easy to keep track of both of these books, because Empire of Storms, oh my god, so much happens in this book. It was Queen of Shadows and Empire of Storms, wow. Just a ride of action. She is an incredible action writer. Oh my god. But Tower of Dawn, I am so happy I decided to do the tandem read of these two books. Because A lot of people say that Tower of Dawn is their least favorite book because it doesn't take place with the main protagonist, which is Aelin, because Aelin is not even in this book. And the reason why you read both of these books at the same time is because the events of both of these books actually occur at the same time, which I thought was sick. It's just so cool. I love it. But Tower of Dawn is all about Cale's story after he gets injured by the Volg King. And we will get into my thoughts about Tower of Dawn after I talk about Empire of Storms. So basically, Empire of Storms is about Celaena's journey of going to Maeve and going back to kill her, because Maeve ends up, betraying everyone, and she's a bitch. So everybody pretty much wants to kill her. And also, like, Rowan is betrayed by her as well. So I just ripped off the top of this blush, by the way. I can't believe that just happened. But, sometimes some of these drugstore packaged brands are pretty cheap. So she wants to kill Maeve in this book, and it's their journey, like, through the sea of going back to Maeve. But there's so many things that happen in this book because they are, attacked a million times, and also Manon is questioning her loyalty, and also Manon actually ends up getting captured by Aelin. But Aelin's main goal is to kill Maeve. But also, she's not sure if she can trust Celaena. What am I going to use for highlight? Hold on one second. And Dorian ends up, getting close to Manon, because Manon kind of, like, understands, like, Dorian's struggles a little bit. Because Manon actually... Oh, yeah, this is what happens in Queen of Shadows, too. So, Manon's second, Asterin, keeps on warning Manon in Queen of Shadows that her grandmother is actually, like, evil. Manon's grandmother. And, like, Manon doesn't want to hear it. Like, she basically kind of has, like, what do you call it? I guess, like, Stockholm Syndrome a little bit about her grandmother, that she's like, no, she's not evil. She's okay. Like, she loves the witches. And, Manon also finds out that, this Volg army is not just wanting to possess humans, but they also want to possess witches, because they think that witches are stronger to withstand Volg, and they would become even stronger possessing witches. But, Asterin says, this is wrong. Like, we're not supposed to be taken over or possessed by anything else. We're witches, So, Manon, Asterin ends up doing something, because Manon ends up killing somebody that Asterin covers for Manon, because she doesn't want Manon to be killed, because Manon is the head of the 13 witches of her coven. So Asterin ends up taking the blame. So Asterin is the one that's sentenced to die, but Manon actually ends up saving her from her grandmother, and they end up having to run away, and they are now, like, shamed by the witch clan. So Manon actually does not have any loyalties in Empire of Storms, and that's why she ends up getting captured by Aelin. And also, Dorian ends up getting, like, closer to Manon, and they end up developing, like, a sexual relationship, because you don't know if, like, Manon is gonna, like, kill anyone or not, because you don't know, like, where her loyalties lie still. And also, since I mentioned Elide before, Elide ends up being loyal to Manon. Like, she will serve her for her life, you know, like she loves Manon, blah, blah, blah. I think I'm just going to wear my Summer Fridays today. I really don't feel like wearing a lipstick today. So she ends up being found by Lorcan, and Lorcan is actually Maeve's other like blood-sworn Fae warrior, and he ends up having to, I think, run away from Maeve, and he ends up finding Elide, and they end up going through their journey together in Empire of Storms. And because Manon ends up sending Elide away from the witches because, you know, since she couldn't stay there anymore, since Maeve, like, obviously, you know, I can't believe I still have 2 more books to talk about. Like, I'm not even done yet, but we'll be done in like 10 minutes. Because like Tower of Dawn, really nothing happened. So since she sends Elide away, she is basically with Lorcan, but Lorcan hates Aelin. He wants to kill her, so he actually ends up using Elide to get back to Aelin, because Elide actually is someone that is loyal to Aelin. Like, she's her queen. And actually, she's a character that I got confused with, that when she was young, her parents were also killed by Volg demons. And I forget what her name is, but she ends up being, like, you know, someone that is really important. She ends up saving Elide because she stays in the cottage of, when she sends Elide away, and she ends up getting murdered, and Elide, like, runs away and gets found by the witches. But Elide actually has an uncle named Veron, I believe. And he actually, like, just hates Elide. Like, he doesn't really care about her. He actually, like, tortures her and injures her leg. And her leg ends up being, like, so fucked up that it's, like, beyond repair. And he's basically just, like, not cared about for her, like, for her whole life. And also, he's a Volg, like, commander as well. Like, he's very important with the Volg and whatever. So, basically, at the end of Empire of Storms, they, like, all come together because, you know, Elide and Lorcan both find Aelin, and they are traveling on a ship to get to Maeve. And basically, Maeve ends up enslaving Aelin to her at the end of this book. But Tower of Dawn doesn't really come into play. But I absolutely ended up loving this book. It was just so good. But with Tower of Dawn, it's all about Chaol's, recovery, basically, of his injury. And honestly, like, I do understand why this is people's least favorite book. I don't mind a story about Chaol, though. Like, again, I don't really hate Chaol as much as other people do. Honestly, like, I really loved all of the characters. There wasn't really, like, a character I really highly disliked. Again, I don't really hate Chaol. I think he's a way more interesting character than basically all the rest of the characters in this book. Except for Yrene, because Yrene comes into play in Kingdom of Ash, like, a lot, but she doesn't really she gets reintroduced in Tower of Dawn, and I'll tell you why it's a reintroduction. So basically, Chaol gets sent to this other kingdom to go get healed. He leaves Dorian in Adarlan, because Adarlan is now, Dorian is now the king of Adarlan, since they killed the king at the end of Queen of Shadows. And since the toll of Chaol killing the king ends up injuring his spine, he has to go to this kingdom to be healed. So he gets sent to the healer named Yrene, and basically it's all about, like, him getting healed and whatever. It's like 300 pages of it, of him just getting healed by her. And I'm like, I don't really care. I really feel like this book could have been a lot shorter, Do you know what I wish this book was? It was kind of like a 6.5 kind of book where because I'm now reading the ACOTAR series by Sarah J. Maas, and there's like a 3.5 book, which is basically like a book in between 3 and 5, or like 3 and 4, where it's called A Court of Frost and Starlight, and it's only like 200 something pages, and basically it's like a half story, probably of like different characters. I'm not really sure, but I feel like that's what this book could have been. This book did not have to be 600 pages long, because I found myself during the tandem read just wanting to go back and finish Empire of Storms. I did not even really care what was going on in this book at this point, because after I was like halfway through this book, then it basically had you go on like a binge of like 200 pages of this book. And I was so excited for it, because I'm like, this book is so good. I just want to see what, like, literally the momentum is kept up in this book the entire time. And after I read that like 200 and so stretch of this book, I read that in like 2 days. Then I had to go back to this book, and I'm like, I just want to finish Empire of Storms. Like, I really was thinking about giving up on the tandem read, because I'm like, this book is just so boring. But I ended up finishing it. Basically, all that happens is in this book is that you end up finding out that Yrene is like a very important healer, and you end up finding out that the Volg are like basically infections, and she can actually heal them. You know, get into like the human that's possessed and heal them by her powers. And you know, Chol ends up falling in love with Yrene. But basically, like, I don't even want to talk about the other characters in this book, because they're literally, like, just so insignificant that they don't really matter that much. Like, Nesrin is introduced in Queen of Shadows, and she, like, kills somebody important to Zelena, for Zelena. Like, she saves Zelena's life. So that's basically, like, the only reason why she's important. But basically with Nesrin, she ends up going to the spiders in this book, and you end up finding out that the spiders are actual Volg. And that's it. Like, that's all that really happens in this book. Like, nothing really that interesting happens in it. Like, they, you know, make references to Aelin, and they're like, oh yeah, like Aelin's doing this. And basically the only interesting part of this book was the epilogue, because this basically just gives you a preview of Maeve capturing Aelin at the end, at the very end of this book. And I'm like, if I was, you know, waiting for Kingdom of Ash to come out when this series wasn't completed, I would be kind of pissed that I would have to read this whole book in order to get to Kingdom of Ash, because Kingdom of Ash literally has the same momentum as Queen of Shadows and Empire of Storms, that I was like, this book was so boring. So I don't even need to talk about the rest of the details of this book, because honestly, really nothing really happens that much in Tower of Dawn. So now we're going to go to the last and final book, which was called Kingdom of Ash, and I just finished this yesterday. And the reason why I finished this a little bit faster than I thought, because this book is almost 1,000 pages. I will talk about maybe it didn't have to be 1,000 pages, because I feel like the last 30 pages were a little bit long and unnecessary. But so much happens in this book, so I'm going to try and recap it real quick, because like a bunch of wars happen. Obviously, you knew that Aelin was going to have to face Maeve at some point. So basically, Aelin gets captured by Maeve at the end of Empire of Storms, and that basically is what happens in the first, like, quarter of this book. Like, the first 200 pages is where Aelin is basically being tortured by Maeve, and this sick fuck named Cain. He is sick. All he wants to do is make her bleed, make her burn, torture her. Like, it is, like, a little bit much. So just a little bit of a trigger warning if you're easily triggered by graphic things. I'm just warning you. It's a little much. But of course, Rowan ends up saving Aelin, and Lorcan and Elide are with Aeneon. And basically at the end of Empire of Storms, Lysandra does something to basically betray Aeneon. And he feels so betrayed that they end up falling in love in Empire of Storms, by the way. Like, he, like, takes his time with her. And Lysandra is also a shapeshifter. So, after, like, the spell is broken of the kingdom of Adarlan not having, you know, magic anymore, because after the spell is broken, everyone that can weld magic is able to, and you find out that Lysandra is a shapeshifter, so now she can shapeshift. I forgot all of that, so I'm sorry that I didn't mention that before. So, I forget what it actually is. I think she keeps from Aeneon that, Aelin was intending to be captured by Aelin. And he was really upset that Lysandra didn't tell him this. So he feels betrayed and he hates her. And that's, like, mostly what his story is in Kingdom of Ash. And then also it goes to Chaol and Yrene going to Chaol's father to help him fight the Volg that are coming to his father's land, because his father is actually the lord of his kingdom, and Chaol goes there to help him, but also Chaol's father kind of hates him. So that's what happens with them. And then Lorcan and Elide and Aeneon are now together because they're separated from Aelin, and I think Rowan is with, I can't remember who he's with. Hold on, I need to go to the bathroom. Okay, so basically these are the 3 important things that happen at the end of Empire of Storms that are basically setting all of the events of Kingdom of Ash. Because again, Tower of Dawn is just a filler. Like, it doesn't really, like, progress the story in any kind of way. Again, it could have been like a 200-page book. That, honestly, I would have kind of wished it was, because, like, you know, the last 4 books are so long. They're over 600 pages, and Kingdom of Ash is almost 1,000. So basically at the end of Empire of Storms, basically the main goal in Empire of Storms is so Maeve does not get these things called the word keys, and basically if she possesses these 3 word keys, she could basically, like, destroy all humans and, like, you know, rule as a Volg bitch, you know, because we end up finding out that Maeve is actually a Volg queen. She's not Fae. She just pretends to be Fae. So, and she's actually really powerful. Like, she makes Maeve, like, hallucinate at the beginning of Kingdom of Ash and creates all of these, like, fantasies for Aelin, because she tortures her to find out where the weird keys are. It's like where the wild things are. But Aelin actually secretly gives the weird keys that they possess, because they only possess 2 of them, to Manon. And Manon actually takes them and runs away with Dorian. And so that's what happens at the end of Empire of Storms. And I forgot what else I wanted to say about it. But that's, like, one of the main things. Oh, and Lorcan, since Lorcan wants to betray Aelin and kill her because he's still blood sworn to Maeve, Maeve actually releases Lorcan of his blood oath, and she, like, doesn't care about him anymore. She's like, you are released, you are shamed, because she kind of realizes that Lorcan is in love with Elide, because they end up falling in love, that she's like, you know, fuck you, I don't need you anymore. But, you know, since Rowan and Aelin both believe that Lorcan was going to betray them and, you know, be with Maeve, that they now, like, you know, shun him and hate him, and Elide feels betrayed by him too, that she's like, fuck you, I don't want to be in love with you anymore. So that's basically, like, what most of Kingdom of Ash is about, is Aelin and Lysandra's love story, and, no, not Aelin, Elide and Lorcan's love story, and Aeneon and Lyssandra's love story. Since Aeneon felt betrayed by Lysandra, they basically hate each other throughout this whole book. And also, since Elide feels betrayed by Lorcan, she hates him throughout most of the book. And then, like, they both end up coming together and end up falling in love again because they realize that, you know, it was during, like, 2 wars where, like, Elide has to save Lorcan from being killed because, and then she realizes how much that she loves him because she basically says the day before that, I hate you, I don't care what happens to you in this war, and he's almost on the brink of death, and then she goes and saves him, and then they realize how much they love each other. And then with Lysandra, it was kind of the same thing, that she goes and shapeshifts and, like, almost dies, and Aeneon goes and saves her, and then he realizes how much of an asshole he's been to her, and basically, like, saves her and, you know, begs for her forgiveness. And basically throughout this whole book is Aelin preventing Maeve from getting the weird keys. And then there's this turning point in the book where since they're all scattered, they're all finally reunited together because Dorian is with Manon, and Dorian is actually, since he's a free wielder of magic, realizes how powerful he actually is, that he wants to go and get kind of captured by Maeve so he can pick her off for information. But Dorian ends up proving that he's actually very, very strong because Maeve tries to take over his mind like she did to Aelin. So since Aelin ends up getting rescued, she ends up going back with Rowan, and they're together. And basically throughout the whole book, it's her struggle of, you know, eventually having to sacrifice herself for the weird keys to destroy them, because if you end up destroying the weird keys, basically you end up destroying yourself. Like, it has to be some kind of sacrifice, and it either has to be Aelin or Dorian to do it. And Dorian has basically, like, lost his, you know, kind of his, you know, joy of living after Sorsa was murdered in Heir of Fire or Queen of Shadows. I can't remember which one. But then he ends up with Manon, and they end up, you know, having, you know, again, a sexual relationship. But Manon doesn't know if she actually, like, loves him or cares for him. But she actually ends up really actually caring for him. But then he goes to Maeve and just leaves Manon after they, you know, had sex that night. And then he just bounces and goes and to Maeve to basically, like, fuck with her. And ends up getting the other weird key or something. So then he ends up getting reunited with Aeneon and Aelin and Aelin, Chol, Kale, I mean, why can I never say his name? Yrene, Nesrin, the whole gang. Like, Aeneon and Lysandra are in another land fighting for, I think it's for Adarlan. I think they're back in Adarlan. Also, like, just one side note before I talk about the ending. Why does she never, like, really talk about, like, Adarlan being ruled? Because, like, she kind of touches on that Dorian's brother, which is named Holland. He's, like, introduced in, like, Throne of Glass. I just didn't talk about him until now. That he's ruling Adarlan. But then, you know, he actually runs away with the mother, with the queen. You know, because obviously the king had a queen, and that's Dorian's mother. They run away from Adarlan after the king is murdered. So I was like, where's the ruler of Adarlan? Like, Dorian stays there for a little while, but then Rowan actually takes him away from Adarlan and Empire of Storms because he's actually not safe there because the Volg are actually going to take over Adarlan, but she doesn't really talk about it in, like, Kingdom of Ash. So I'm like, what the fuck is going on with Adarlan? And then literally, like, at the end of Kingdom of Ash, he's like, I have a kingdom to rule. I'm going to go back to Adarlan. So I'm like, what? So I was like, what was going on the whole time? So basically, like, throughout the rest of the book, it's Aelin has to decide whether or not she wants to destroy the weird keys before they go and fight the big battle to save the world, pretty much, and defeat Maeve and Erewhon. And Erewhon is the other evil, he's the Volg king, and I think he was the one that was possessing the king of Adarlan. And they basically, you know, want to destroy the world and everything. And, you know, all the characters end up going to help Aedion and Lysandra defeat all the Volg. And that's basically, like, the ending. Like, they destroy the weird keys, and Aelin ends up surviving, even though Aelin was supposed to give up her life. She didn't tell everyone that that was what was going to happen. And the whole thing with Rowan and Aelin, you know, Rowan, since Rowan's, like, in love with her, and also they get married in Empire of Storms, so, which they didn't make it, like, she didn't really make it, like, a big deal. Like, she just marries them in Empire of Storms, and you don't find out until, like, the end. And I'm like, oh, they got married on the boat? Okay. So that's basically what happens. And then the last, like, 30 pages, and Rowan's, like, devastated as she's going to sacrifice her life, but then she ends up being alive. But she actually ends up giving up her magic and her human form, and now she's stuck in Fae form for, like, the rest of her life. But she actually doesn't really possess magic anymore. But then they end up defeating everyone, and she ends up becoming the Queen of Terrasen, and there's all happy endings for everybody. Like, no one really important actually dies, which I actually thought one important character was going to die. So I'm actually happy that they didn't. So I really need to wrap this up because I need to go. I might just say my rating later because I really need to leave right now. But the only other thing I wanted to say is that Yrene was actually one of the characters that you meet in, I believe, the Assassin's Blade that comes back in Tower of Dawn, and she's actually someone that Aelin ends up helping in Assassin's Blade, and she comes back and swears her loyalty to Aelin because Aelin actually helped train her in Assassin's Blade because she was just like this helpless healer that didn't possess magic anymore because obviously magic was banned in Adarlan, and they met when they were like really young, and then you end up finding out that that's who Yrene is, and that was really, really cool, but also, like, the whole story in Tower of Dawn was so boring. So now I'm just gonna do my rating. So, like, she ends up being the Queen of Terrasen, and that's how the story ends, and Rowan and her end up ruling together, and Dorian and Manon end up ruling Adarlan because it actually brings together the witches with Adarlan, because the witches end up allying with Aelin to fight the Volg. The witches, like, question their loyalty until, like, they have to save the world. So the witches end up making, like, a huge sacrifice, and Asterin ends up sacrificing herself for Manon to live. It's actually, like, really sad because, like, the entire 13, like, end up sacrificing themselves. So, like, I was, like, crying in most of the parts of Kingdom of Ash, but it was amazing. So let me just do my rating really quick, and I'll count down which ones were my favorite and least favorite. So number 8 is obviously Tower of Dawn. Like I said, I call this one Tower of Yawn because I was just so bored throughout the whole thing. So this is definitely my least favorite book, and I understand why people don't really love this one. But again, my opinion's a little bit different about Chol. I really don't hate him that much. I kind of understand why he questions Aelin and how dangerous she is, because, like, he's really the only one that does. Because she is dangerous at one point. Like, at some points you don't end up rooting for Aelin the entire time. And then number 7 is The Assassin's Blade. I still loved this book, but since it was the prequel, and I ended up loving, like, other books a little bit more than this one, that's why I put this one at number 7. But it was still a great book, and honestly, like, this made me fall in love with the whole series because I just wanted to read so much after I read the first one. And then number 6 is Heir of Fire. I know that this is a lot of people's favorite as well. The only reason why I am rating it at number 6 is because, like I said, I got a little bit bored with the parts of Manon in this book. They just, like, bored me a little bit, but the rest of the book was amazing. So I definitely did love that. So Tower of Dawn, I would rate 4 out of 5 stars. Like, honestly, I would probably rate it a 3.5 out of 5. Like, it was still a good book, but honestly, compared to the rest of them, they were amazing. Assassin's Blade, 4 out of 5, I would say. And then Heir of Fire, same, 4 out of 5. But I rated, you know, all the other books on Goodreads of 5 out of 5 just because I'm reading the whole series in its entirety as a 5 out of 5. And then Kingdom of Ash is number 5. And I know Kingdom of Ash is a lot of people's favorite as well because it's such an epic finale to this series. But I have kind of the same feeling as one of the other YouTubers that I watched that did a whole reading vlog on this. Was the only reason why she didn't rate this book a 5 out of 5. I mean, I still gave it 5 out of 5 stars because it's such an incredible book. Is that sometimes at some parts, since the book is so long, I kind of felt like I wasn't taking in anything that was happening and I was just reading the words, that I kind of had to go back and reread some things as I was reading them. But honestly, she kept up the momentum so much in this book, and that is so hard to do with a book that's this long. So I have to give her props to that because she's still an incredible writer. But that's the only reason why I would say Kingdom of Ash wasn't my absolute tip-top favorite. And then number 4 is Throne of Glass. I really did love this book. Again, I feel like the adventure just was kept up throughout this book, and you were so enthralled into finding out who was killing all of the assassins because they were all getting brutally murdered. So this one's definitely 5 out of 5 as well. And then top 3, number 3 has to be Empire of Storms. Like I said, Empire of Storms is just, it's so amazing. I was so enthralled in this book. She keeps up the action in this book throughout the entirety of this book. There is absolutely no lulls in this book. Maybe the first 20 pages are a little bit slow, but after that, it just does not stop. Does not stop. I love it so much. So definitely 5 out of 5 for all of these books in the top 4. And then number 2 is Queen of Shadows. This is a lot of people's favorite book, but and again, I felt the same kind of momentum about this book that I felt in Empire of Storms. I just think Queen of Shadows and Empire of Storms were some of the best books in the whole series. So obviously this one has to be number 2 for me. It was just so good. And also, Kale made me cry a lot. I don't know why I keep on saying Chol. I'm sorry. Because when Dorian ends up being saved from the possession of the demon, and he ends up getting reunited with Kale as Dorian, I was crying so much because I just love their friendship. So that's why I am a fan of Kale a little bit more. But I absolutely love Dorian. I think he's still my favorite character because he goes through so many trials as a character. I just love him. And then number 1, of course, has to be Crown of Midnight. Crown of Midnight is just perfect. I loved this book so much, and this was definitely my absolute favorite of the entire series. 5 out of 5 stars. Just so much happens in this book, and this is really where you see like a turning point of the series. And this book and Queen of Shadows is a lot of people's favorite in the series for good reason. They're just fantastic books. So yeah, that is all my thoughts and opinions on the Throne of Glass series. I hope this video wasn't too long, but this is my entire reading wrap up for January because these were all the books that I read in January. I read Throne of Glass to Kingdom of Ash in January because, like I said, I finished Assassin's Blade at the end of December. So I read 7 books this month. That's still a lot. That's like over 4,000 pages, so that was a lot of reading. Probably the most reading I'll do in my life, to be honest, because this series is really long. So now I'm reading the ACOTAR series, and I'm on the first book already. I started it yesterday, and I'm like 140 pages in already. I am so obsessed with this series already, and I cannot wait to read the rest of it. So that's what I'm reading now. And I will come back and talk about all my thoughts on ACOTAR once I finish it. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. So please like and subscribe. Follow me on my Instagram at CBW819 and check out my Poshmark at the same handle. I've been talking for forever. I need to go. So please let me know what your thoughts were on Throne of Glass. Which one was your least favorite book? Which one was your favorite? I really would love to know. Did you even like this series? Please let me know. And I hope you guys have a great day. I will try and link my Goodreads in the description box below. If not, I'll just share it on my Instagram stories if you guys are interested to see what I'm reading now and see what I want to read. So yeah, that's it. Bye!